Hi guys, this is Business Economics BE128. Together with the notes I've sent to you, your core text and your supplementary text, researches you can carry out online, you should be able to acquire enough and sufficient knowledge for you to be able to tackle any question of business economics and make managerial decisions at different times. Right now, we want to introduce ourselves to economics and understand the nature of economic resources. Therefore, at the end of the lesson, students should be able to explain microeconomics and macroeconomics, differentiate between both of them, explain the problems of scarcity, opportunity cost, and even choice, describe production possibility frontier, and understand economic systems. Economics can be defined in different ways. We have different authors like Adam Smith, Alfred Marshall, Robinson, among others, that have defined economics in different ways. But the particular one we are adopting for the purpose of this lesson is the definition by Lionel Robbins, which defines economics as a science which studies human behavior as relationship between given ends and scarce means which have alternative uses. Economics is often referred to as social science. And it's referred to as social science because it uses scientific methods to build theories. And these theories help to explain the behavior of individuals, the behavior of groups, the response of organizations when it comes to utilizing scarce resources. Therefore, in a normal world, resources are never sufficient. In any economy, resources are never enough. An individual is referred to as a rational consumer who wants to utilize the scarce resources to the best of its own satisfaction. Therefore, Lionel Robbins' definition is all-encompassing, and it can actually bring out the importance and the essence of economics when it comes to definition. Business economics or managerial economics applies economic theory and methodology to business decisions. Scarce resources actually prompted the questions of what organization will choose from, and therefore, decision makers in businesses must provide and must understand the most efficient way to utilize the available resources that is scarce, that they possess. Otherwise, profit will not be maximized. Land, labor, capital, and entrepreneur are various scarce resources that businesses use at various points in time. Business economics can be normative in nature, can be positive in nature. Normative economics focuses on what ought to be. The price of milk should be $5 per bottle. This will make farmers enjoy higher standard of living. Families' income will increase, and the lives of people will be better. That is a good example of normative economics because it reflects value judgment. For positive economics, rather, focuses on description, which aims at what operates within the society. For example, when income declines or falls, demand for normal goods will reduce,
our demand for inferior goods will also reduce. If the government raises tax of a product, definitely the profit of such a product will reduce. These are facts in the society, and that is positive economics. So positive economics is usually described as what is. Business economics scope range from demand analysis and forecasting, cost and production analysis, pricing decisions, policies and practices, profit management, capital management, among others. Because organizations must make decisions that will determine whether they can continue to import, export, manufacture, utilize those resources, consider who will purchase, consider the factors that determine what people purchase per time, consider what will also motivate them as an organization to supply their product. So the scope of business economics is all-encompassing when it comes to its contribution and effectiveness in the success of such a company. Microeconomics focuses on decisions that are made by individuals and firms. These individuals can be a single individual, a single person, can be a household, can be a business organization, can even be a government parastatal. There are different ways certain human beings behave and respond as variables change. For example, when price changes, what effect will it have on what an individual or a company will purchase or sell? So macroeconomics tries to explain how and why different goods are valued differently by different people and how people's financial decisions are made, as well as organizations and government. It is dynamic in nature, and it tries as much as possible to measure supply, demand, efficiency, and cost associated with producing goods and services. Other aspects of macroeconomics are individual consumer behavior, labor market, externalities, supply and demand, game theory, among others. Macroeconomics examines the aggregate behavior in an economy. The overall economy is both national and international level. There are different geographical regions. There are different continents all over the world. So macroeconomics focuses on foreign trade, government policies such as fiscal and monetary policies, fluctuations and changes in unemployment rate, inflation, interest rate, GDP, business cycles, among others. It also focuses on economic growth, international trade, and globalization. There are basic economic problems that individuals, organizations, and government face day in, day out. Scarcity is a condition that exists when there are not enough resources to satisfy all the wants of individuals in the society, and of not be enough resources because the needs are numerous and unlimited. As a result of scarcity, there is the need for choice about how scarce resources is utilized for effectiveness. Opportunity cost is the next highest valued alternative that is given up when a choice is made, which are normally referred to as alternative forgone. To choose between watching cinema for leisure and going to the library to study. An individual that has only 1 hour can either choose leisure or study in the library. So when an individual chooses to go to the cinema for leisure, such an individual will forego the benefit of studying in the library. And this, of course, is what businesses do. And this, of course, is what countries of the world also embark on. Otherwise, the scarce resources will not be sufficient enough to manufacture both of them at the same. There's a relationship between opportunity cost and production possibility curve. Production possibility curve shows the trade-offs that are associated with how resources are allocated between the production of two goods. More often than not, we use PPC to illustrate concept of scarcity, opportunity cost, efficiency, inefficiency, economic growth, shift, among others. There are assumptions of production possibility curve, and one of it is that there are only two goods produced per time. Another assumption of production possibility curve is that resources are limited. They are scarce. And so production possibility curve shows how two goods can be traded off, how more of one can be produced and less of the other can be produced to ensure that the available resources are utilized effectively. There is a relationship between scarcity, choice, and opportunity cost and PPC. From the graph, you will understand that as a result of scarcity, there are limited quantity of good X and good Y that can be produced. Also, businesses, individuals, and government must choose between good X and good Y. Don't forget that the assumption of production possibility curve is that there are only two goods produced. By implication, you cannot choose the same quantity of good X and Y to produce at different points on the PPC. Opportunity cost, there is trade-off between good X and good Y. How much of one should we produce and how much of one should we sacrifice? From the graph, you can see that when Y10 was produced, X3 was produced. That means we have more of good X and or more of good Y, I beg your pardon, and less of good X produced. There are three combinations on the production possibility frontier or production possibility curve. Remember that the assumption of PPC is that the resources are scarce and are limited, and there are only two goods. Point A, B, C fall on the production possibility curve, and it is a proof that all the resources are fully utilized. The combination has shown efficiency of output. Points D and E are inefficient combination because not all resources are fully used. And if you trace the curve D to E from the two axes, they will be lower or they will have decreased compared with the production possibility curve, which is a proof that there are resources that have not been fully utilized. Of course, the effect of this will be reduction in the production of both output. Point F is unattainable or impossible point because an output combination cannot be obtained at that point. It is beyond the resources that are available. So it is referred to as an attainable point. We can understand that the PPC curve is concave to the origin. This is because the increasing marginal opportunity cost is actually in place. This is because in order to increase the production of one good by 1 unit, more and more units of the other good have to be sacrificed. Since the resources are limited and are not equally efficient in the production of both goods and services. There are various basic economic questions that organizations, individuals, businesses must ask in production, in purchase, and in the daily running of the business. The first question is what to produce. This has to do with the decision when it comes to the most relevant, the most useful, the most economical, the most beneficial product per time. For example, an economy wants to decide whether it should produce kitchen appliances or computers whether they should build bridges or build libraries. Second question is how to produce. This has to do with the method of production. Should we use machine or should we work by hand? These are two decisions that organizations must make. In other words, should our production be labor intensive or capital intensive? This is a critical and crucial decisions that organizations must make, because the economic situation will dictate and predict. For example, in a less developed country where the unemployment level is high, there is no reason for such an economy to utilize capital-intensive technique, which focuses on the use of machines in production. Such an economy should focus on labor-intensive technique in order to make provision for the masses, increase standard of living, and ensure that poverty level is reduced. In such a way, a country is providing employment, and this will contribute to the GDP of an economy, and this will contribute to economic growth. The third question is, for whom to produce? Who will consume the goods that are produced? Who will get the consumed goods? Is it first come, first serve? Should it be allocated or given out based on some variables, gender, age, health, or wealth? How should we distribute these goods? The basic economic questions are answered by the basic economic systems. Number one, free market. In a free market economy, resources are allocated through the interaction of free and self-directed market forces of demand and supply. It's an economy characterized by economic freedom, competition, because we have more than one producer, private ownership of properties, profit motive. Individual is driven by a desire to make profit. And there is freedom of enterprise. That means everybody is free enough to engage in whatever economic activity he or she desires. The pursuit of self-interest is at the heart of market economy. A good example is Hong Kong. Another one is New Zealand. Now, this market economy answers the questions what to produce. And the question of what to produce is determined by the consumer's preference, taste, choices. By implication, a manufacturer must produce what an individual desires or what the society desires at the particular time, because they have control over their income, they have control over their taste and over their preference. How to produce? The producers determine what method of production they employ that is going to favor them and that is going to increase their profit. And for whom to produce? This is determined by the purchasing power of individuals. Of course, you buy what you can afford and they sell to you what you can pay for. So the purchasing power of individuals determine for whom to produce in the market economy. Command economy is characterized by collective ownership of means of production. This is another solution to the economic problem when it comes to allocation of resources. This is an economy where the planning is centrally carried out. By implication, all basic decisions regarding as to what and how and for whom are decided by the centrally planned authority. There is the economic equality in command economy. In other words, there is a strive to achieve economic equality as a country. There is lack of competition and there is no rivalry. Although command economies have certain advantages over free market economy when it comes to coordination of scarce resources, especially during war or natural disaster, but still it has been known to have failed the member of the society in different ways and at different times. Cuba, North Korea, former Soviet Union are different examples of command economies. The command economy answers the question what to produce, how to produce, and for whom to produce. And what to produce is determined by the preference of the government. How to produce? By the government and their employees. And for whom to produce is also totally by the government. So the command economy is purely managed by the government and controlled by the government. These economies are characterized by coexistence of both the private and the public sector. In other words, all economic decisions are partly taken by the state and partly taken by the private entrepreneurs. Mixed economies have distinct public sector, where resources are allocated also mainly by the government. We're talking about defense, police, fire services. In many sectors, resources are allocated by a combination of different market and planning. For example, healthcare, we have both public and private sector provision. Education, there is both the public and the private sector provision as well. So it is a system where the government also has a clear and definite economic plan. It is balanced in such a way that the public sector enterprises may be located in the backward regions so as to ensure its development. Mixed economy answer questions what to produce, how to produce, and for whom to produce. What to produce is determined partly by consumer preferences and partly by government. How to produce is determined partly by producers. Of course, they are seeking profit, and so they must adopt the technique of production that is most beneficial to them, and partly by the government. Government's focus is on the society's betterment, to reduce unemployment, to increase standard of living or improve standard of living, to contribute to GDP, and to ensure that there is growth in the economy. And for whom to produce is determined partly by the purchasing power and partly by government preferences. A traditional economy is a system that relies on customs, history, beliefs, norms, and values. These are what guide their decisions in production and distributions. They depend on primary sources of providence, such as agriculture, fishing, hunting, gathering, among others. They use barter because they do not value cash. It is not their belief, it is not their custom. In most countries, or in some countries in Asia, Latin America, the Middle East, they still practice the traditional economy. So when it comes to economic decisions, they are based on custom. What to produce, how to produce, for whom to produce. They are all based on customs, on historical precedent, on the belief, on the history that they have adopted over the years and from generation to generation. These are the four basic economic systems. And these are the ways these economic systems answer basic economic questions. And these basic economic questions come up as a result of the basic economic problems. So it is a chain reaction. And businesses also must understand this concept in order to be able to make critical decisions when it comes to what to supply per time, the prices to charge, who will purchase it, what profit will be generated, how to reduce cost, what policies economies of the world put in place when it comes to trade, because there are different countries, there are different policies, and there are different rules. So countries of the world must take cognizance of this in order for them to be able to fit in to each of these countries when it comes to businesses. These are references and text for you to read. Download them, visit the library, and also use your handbook. This will augment the knowledge that is needed, and this will help you
to acquire enough information and to broaden and widen your scope of understanding. The topic we are discussing right now is demand and supply, as well as market equilibrium, and how it is applied in the real world. Therefore, at the end of this lesson, students are expected to be able to explain and understand demand and its applications, supply and its applications, analyze the market equilibrium, and be able to plot the necessary graphs and make the necessary calculations, understand price ceiling and price floor, and be able to explain externalities.
Right now, we want to look at demand and supply and market equilibrium. What is demand? Demand is the quantity of commodity a buyer is willing and able to purchase at a given time and at a given price. By implication, an individual must be ready to buy the product, and at the same time must be able. The ability to purchase the product focuses on the purchasing power. That means such an individual must have the income or the money that will help when it comes to purchasing of that product. There are various determinants of demand. One is the price of commodity. If a crate of egg is 100 pula, an individual may buy only one. Because considering Botswana prices, 100 pula is quite outrageous for a crate of eggs. But when a crate of egg is 35 pula, 30 pula, an individual may decide to buy 6, 5, or 4. In other words, an individual can increase the quantity he or she is purchasing. So price of the commodity is a great determinant of what somebody will purchase in an economy. The level of income, which is the money that an individual holds for time, can also determine. The price of related good is also a determinant of demand. For example, if the price of tastic rice is 50 pula per 5 kg, and the price of Uncle Sam rice is 25 pula still for 5 kg. A rational human being that wants to economize and utilize resources may not purchase tastic rice at 50 pula, since both of them are substitute. So price of related goods can determine how much, what quantity a consumer can purchase per time. Of course, taste and preference they change at different times. And advertisements can motivate and can stimulate desire to purchase goods when it comes to an individual. The laws of demand state the higher the price, the lower the quantity demanded. By implication, there is an inverse relationship between price and quantity. The lower the price, the higher the quantity demanded, and the higher the price, the lower the quantity demanded. It means the quantity demanded of a good falls when the price of the good rises, and the quantity demanded of a good rises when the price of the good falls. This is a negative or inverse relationship. Now, let's look at individual demand. Individual demand is the quantity of commodity one person is willing and able to purchase at various prices and at different times. Let's look at this schedule. This is what an individual is willing to purchase. The quantities of lollipop willing to purchase at different prices. We can see when it's 0.50 pula, that means when it's 50 tebe, he was willing to buy 10. But when it's 2 pula 50 tebe, he was willing to buy only 2. This is depicting the law of demand. which shows when the price is high, the individual is willing to buy fewer quantities, and when the price is very low, individual is willing to buy high quantity. This can be expressed using a demand curve. And a demand curve is a graphical representation of that tabulated demand schedule. And on this graph, we are going to see different quantities that this individual is willing to purchase at different price. And that is why we see the demand curve sloping downward. And the demand curve sloping downward shows the negative or inverse relationship between the two variables. And the two variables are price and quantity.
There are two types of changes or shifts we have in demand. One is change in demand. Change in demand is the entire movement of the demand curve, either to the left, which is a decrease or an inward shift, or to the right, which is an increase or an outward shift. Now, there are various factors that can change demand entirely from its original position. One can be change in income. For example, student allowance. If student allowance increases from 5,000, definitely what a student will purchase will increase, either the quantity or the quality, irrespective of the ruling price. So that can lead to an outward shift of the demand curve. Now let me show you this in the next slide. And this is a typical example of a leftward shift showing the arrow moving leftward or inward, and then a rightward shift showing the arrow pointing to the right or outward. So an increase in student allowance will shift the curve from D0 to D2, which is an increase in demand. But if there is a decrease in allowance from 5,000 to 1,000, then you see that an individual will not have enough to purchase. So level of income can affect change in demand. Now, the price of the commodity itself. For example, like I cited an example the other time, especially if the goods are related, they can affect what an individual will purchase. For example, Pampers and Huggies. These are products that are related and they are called substitute goods. So a change in the price of a related product will affect the demand of the other. Increase in the price of Huggies will increase the demand for Pampers. So when the price of Huggies increases, there's going to be a reduction in demand from D0 to D1. And that is why you can see the arrow falling from D0 to D1, showing an inward shift. Now, I want you to also apply other factors and study your notes and look at how those factors can change demand. And we are going to discuss that next class. Change in quantity demanded is the movement along the same demand curve. It doesn't shift to the left or to the right. And the only factor that affects this is the price of the commodity in question. Let me show you this on the next slide. Change in quantity demanded can be depicted using the simple curve adapted. We can see that the change is from point A, or the movement is from point A to B, still on the same curve. And the factor that affects this is the price of this particular product. So if the price of crate of X increase, demand will fall. If the price decrease, demand will increase. So this is a particular change that can affect the curve without shifting it inward or outward.
Supply. This is a quantity of commodity a producer is willing and able to sell at a particular time and at a particular price. The law of supply states the higher the price, the higher the quantity supplied, and the lower the price, the lower the quantity supplied. The relationship is direct and is positive. The factors can be supply and tax and subsidies. Of course, when government tax or increases taxes on product, it can reduce the quantity of product being supplied. But when government subsidizes for agricultural products, for example, it motivates producers to supply more of such commodities in the market. The number of related products, natural disaster, cost of raw materials, change in technology which can drag back production process, and firms' objectives. Supply schedule is a table that shows the relationship between price of the goods and quantity supplied. This is a typical supply schedule for lollipops, at which the prices the manufacturer is willing to supply the goods are positively related with the quantity being supplied. This reflects the law of supply, which says the higher the price, the higher the quantity being supplied, and the lower the price, the lower the quantity being supplied. We can see the positive relationship between the price and quantity supplied. And this informs the reason why the supply curve slopes upward from right to left. We have change in supply, which is the bodily shift of the supply curve from left to right or from right to left. And all factors that can change supply, that affect supply and that determine supply, change these graphs, such as firms' objectives, cost of raw materials, natural disaster, price of related goods, among others. Change in quantity supplied is the movement along the same supply curve. And the only factor responsible for this movement is the price of the commodity in question. Demand and supply equilibrium occurs when quantity demanded and quantity supplied meet at the same price. Let us look at this demand and supply for lollipops. At different prices, the quantity demanded and the quantity supplied are reflecting here on the demand schedule. Now, if we plot this demand and supply equilibrium, we are going to arrive at a graph that shows the quantity demanded and the quantity supplied intersecting at the same price. Now, when we look at this table and we look at price 1.50, we will see that the quantity demanded is 6 and the quantity supplied is 6. That is the only price at which both the quantity demanded and the quantity supplied equate. Now, this is obvious in the graph that has been plotted. We can see that at price 1.50, the quantity demanded is 6 and the quantity supplied is 6. This is what we call demand and supply equilibrium. By implication in the market, there will be a price at which there will be an agreement between the suppliers and the customers. A point at which the price that is being charged in the market is favorable to a manufacturer and is also favorable to an individual that is purchasing. We can have excess demand, which can lead to shortage, and at the same time we can have excess supply, which can lead to surplus. Excess demand are all points below the equilibrium point, and they are points below the equilibrium or areas below the equilibrium point because at those prices you can see that individuals are willing to purchase more because the prices are low. This is not favorable for an individual, for a business organization selling, because he or she will not want to sell below the equilibrium price. So most of the time, excess demand leads to shortage. Excess supply are areas above the equilibrium. And those are areas where the prices are higher than the equilibrium. And of course, no rational human being wants to pay higher price for a product. So demand normally reduces at those areas, and this can lead to surplus in the market. So those are the two areas that you must note when you are explaining and when you are plotting the equilibrium demand and supply in the market. And as a business organization, when it comes to decision making, then this will help you to determine how high your prices will be, the kind of product that you will increase its prices, for how long or what duration would you increase such prices. It helps you to determine what to invest in product. It helps you to determine what consumers will purchase. And it helps you to also forecast what your profit level will be as an organization. Price control. Government uses this legal restriction and regulation to control how high or low a market price may go. So economists also use this legal restriction, and government enforces these prices, sometimes in order to maintain affordable goods in the society, like agricultural products. They also enforce prices in the economy to slow down inflation. When it comes to minimum wage and living condition of the members of the community or the society, the government uses the price control as the legal restriction. So during times of crisis or emergencies or wars, consumers are protected from upsurge in prices that can make their standard of living to be very low, that can bring poverty, or that can lower the lifestyle of the people. So government uses price control in order to stabilize the economy at various times. There are two types of price control. We have the price ceiling and have the price floor. The price ceiling is the maximum price set by the government, which any firm should not exceed. It is referred to as an upper limit for the price. And that price will always be below the equilibrium price. More often than not, price ceiling leads to inefficiencies, because individuals will want to buy those products, but the products are not available because the owners or the sellers are not willing to offer this product at that given price. For example, renting a house. If government enforces the price control for landlords, and if these prices are not satisfactory when it comes to the landlord's preference, then these landlords will not allocate these resources efficiently when it comes to consumers. Wasted resources. You see individuals scouting around looking for products, spending money, spending time, and using effort to ensure that they're able to obtain that product because of shortage. And sometimes when there is price ceiling, the product is inefficiently low in quality. Apartments may not be renovated, the toilets may not be presentable, among others. The condition may not be palatable. And so price ceiling can lead to inefficiently low quality. And eventually it can lead to black market, where products are hoarded. And products are sold illegally at prices higher than those ones that government has set. Now, I'm going to show you the effect of price ceiling using a graph.
on the next slide. We can see from the graph that price ceiling has led to shortage when it comes to renting apartment. The equilibrium price is different from the price that the government has enforced. So equilibrium price is at PE here, and the price the government has enforced is below equilibrium price, which is PC. By implication, you will see that the red line showing the supply curve is an indication of the quantity that the landlords or the apartments that the landlords are ready to make available, and that is A1. And you can see that point A2, and that's enforced price of PC. What individuals demand, the number of houses, accommodations that individuals, tenants are scouting for. So price ceiling usually leads to shortage because suppliers are not comfortable with the prices. And the price floors. This is the minimum price buyers are required to pay for a good. It is set by the government and is usually a price that is above the equilibrium. Most of the time, sellers are more comfortable with that price and they produce or manufacture or supply a product of high quality still at high price, of which buyers cannot afford and which leaves them with surplus. Now, let's see this in the graph that is the next slide. The effect of this one, we can see the equilibrium point and we can see the price above the equilibrium point. If we trace it down to QO, that is what individual is willing to pay. And this is what individual is willing to purchase, rather, at that price. And if we trace it to QS, this is what the sellers are willing to supply at that price. QO, what individuals are willing to purchase at that price. QS, what sellers are willing to supply at that price. We can see that gap, that disparity, and this will lead to surplus in the market. So either way, price ceiling and price floor are what governments use to sustain and to maintain and to control what obtains in the market, considering that every economy changes because of the cycle of the business. And there is no economy that does not undergo a change that is negative or positive, that will impact its society in a good way or in an adverse way. So it is left for the government to be able to control what obtains in the market. Otherwise, there's going to be that disparity and instability in the market. And when there is distortion, too much and instability, then the economy will face a lot of challenge. Now we are going to be studying elasticity of demand and supply and how it is applied in business decision and in decision making. Every organization must strategize when it comes to increasing price, reducing price, or maintaining prices. Therefore, at the end of this lesson, students should be able to define elasticity and elasticity of demand as well as supply, identify the different types, make necessary calculations, and be able to graphically illustrate. And also must be able to apply the concept when it comes to decision making in businesses and in organizations. Let's first define elasticity. Elasticity measures change in one variable as a result of changing another variable. Therefore, elasticity of demand measures the degree of responsiveness of changing quantity demanded to how price changes, how income changes, as well as price of other commodities. Therefore, it is a measure of how the consumers react when price changes. Now we have the types of elasticity of demand: price elasticity of demand, income elasticity of demand, and cross elasticity of demand. We are going to pick this one after the other. and then we are going to explain briefly. Price elasticity of demand. This measures the degree of responsiveness of change in quantity demanded to change in price, and it can be expressed as percentage change in quantity demanded over percentage change in price. There are some determinants of elasticity of demand. One is the number of substitutes available in the market. The more the substitutes, the more buyers are willing to opt for other products of such type if a manager or a company increases the price. So, number of substitutes will determine whether an organization will increase the price or let the price be in order to ensure increase in sales. Degree of necessity, price of the good as a proportion of income, and time. Let's look at this example together. 20% change in quantity demanded is as a result of 25% change in price. Price elasticity of demand coefficient can easily be calculated as percentage change in quantity demanded, which is 20%, over percentage change in price, which is 25%. And then the coefficient is obtained. Now, there are different methods of calculating elasticity of demand, but I'm using the percentage method because it is straightforward. Most students are familiar with them. Now, in your books, there are other methods that have been explained there. You can also read them for further clarification. Now, if the price of a fridge is currently 200 pula and the quantity demanded is 4 million, if the price falls to 180 pula and the quantity demanded rises to 6 million, now what is the price elasticity of demand? We can also use a percentage change in quantity demanded over percentage change in price. That is, we can use the percentage method. Now, this percentage method can also be further broken down into Q2 minus Q1 over Q1 times 100 in order for us to obtain the first percentage change in quantity. Everything over P2 minus P1 over P1 times 100 in order to obtain the percentage change in price. Because some questions can demand you to solve the percentage change in quantity demanded first, and marks will be awarded for that, and then for you to solve the percentage change in price next, before you now solve the coefficient. Also, as managers, sometimes we want to measure that degree of elasticity by looking at the percentage change in each variable differently. So this method is a bit straightforward, and most students are familiar with this method. So with this method, if you follow that formula, then you are able to calculate and estimate price elasticity of demand. But mind you, when you calculate price elasticity of demand, the coefficient cannot just be left like that. They have to be interpreted. And that is where the application of elasticity of demand comes in when it comes to managerial decisions. Now, we want to interpret the coefficient of price elasticity of demand in 5 different ways. And these are what we refer to as the degrees of price elasticity of demand. The first one we can have is fairly elastic demand, where the coefficient is greater than 1. And this is a situation in which a small change in price leads to a more than proportional change in quantity demanded. Now, from the graph that you are looking at right now, you will see that the gap between P1 and P2 is not as wide as the gap between Q1 and Q2. A situation like this is called a fairly elastic demand. So when you solve a problem and you interpret your answer, once it is greater than 1, then that degree of elasticity is referred to as fairly elastic. Fairly and inelastic demand is the opposite of the first one that we have just discussed. where the coefficient of elasticity is less than 1. And from the graph that you have in front of you right now, you will see that the distance between P1 and P2 is wider than that of Q1 and Q2. So clearly, inelastic demand is a situation whereby a large change in price leads to a small change in quantity demanded. Unitary elastic demand ensures or entails coefficient of elasticity of demand to be equal to 1. By implication, a proportional change in quantity in price leads to the same proportional change in quantity demanded. And that is why you can see that the distance between P1 and P2 is and distance between Q1 and Q2 are the same. So when you have a figure, for example, if there is 10% change in price and it leads to 10% change in quantity demanded, then your elasticity of demand is going to be unitary, which is going to be 1. Elasticity of demand also can present itself as perfectly elastic or infinitely elastic demand, where irrespective of changes in quantity demanded, price remains the same. Or perfectly inelastic demand, a situation whereby irrespective of the changes in price, quantity does not change. And this kind of elasticity of demand is equal to 0. So these are different ways we can interpret the result of price elasticity of demand. There are other methods, like I mentioned before, of calculating elasticity of demand: the ARC method, the point method, the total outlay method. When you refer to your books, you'll be able to understand more on this concept. But I implore you that you get enough knowledge and stick to the method that you are most comfortable with for the purpose of this teaching. When you're interpreting price elasticity of demand, always remember that a change in price means a change in quantity in the opposite direction. It means price elasticity of demand will always be negative because there is that inverse relationship or negative relationship. So it will definitely carry a negative number, which is permitted to be dropped or to be ignored when you are interpreting the answer. So in other words, do not apply the negative sign. It is not relevant in interpreting your answer. It is only depicting that as one increases, the other decreases. Income elasticity of demand. This measures the degree of responsiveness of change in quantity demanded to change in income. Using the percentage method, it can be expressed as Q2 minus Q1 over Q1, everything over Y2 minus Y1 over Y1, where the Y2 is the new income and the Y1 is the old income. And the Q2 is the new quantity and the Q1 is the old quantity. So when you are given figures, and from the note you have also been given, you can use that simple method to estimate income elasticity of demand. In interpreting income elasticity of demand, the coefficient can carry a positive sign or a negative sign. When it carries a positive sign, it is a normal good, of which its variance can be necessary good, of which its coefficient can be less than 1, or luxurious good, when the coefficient is greater than 1 but still negative. Now, the coefficient can also be negative if it is an inferior good. And it is important and pertinent for us to note at this point that inferior goods are relative. For example, chicken feet, mopani worms. To some people they are inferior, but to others they are nutritious delicacies. So the type of inferior good does not really affect your own interpretation. What matters is your coefficient, the signs, and the application of the income elasticity of demand. The income elasticity of demand is simply expressing what will happen to quantities that individuals will buy when the money at hand changes. So when the money at hand increases and the good is a normal good like rice, toothpaste, individuals are motivated to purchase more of that. But when the money at hand increases, but the good is an inferior good to such a consumer is motivated to buy better product and less of such an inferior good. Cross-elasticity of demand measures the degree of responsiveness of change in one commodity to change in the price of another. Therefore, in cross-price elasticity of demand, two commodities are in question, commodity A and commodity B. But when we are applying the formula and we are solving the questions, we are going to adopt quantity of one and price of the other. Now, using the percentage formula, we have the percentage change in quantity demanded of good X over percentage change in the price of good Y. By implication, we have the change in quantity demanded of X over original quantity of X, everything over change in the price of Y over original price of Y. Still the same formula for price for percentage method that we used in price elasticity of demand. By the time you solve this question using this method, you are going to obtain your answer, which will also be either in positive or negative. When you are interpreting cross elasticity of demand, substitute goods carry positive signs. Pampers and Huggies, close-up and dental cream. These are examples of substitute goods. But complementary goods carry negative signs, such as bread and butter, ink and pen, stove and paraffins. Supplementary goods are goods you cannot use one without the other, whereas substitute goods are goods of which there are options when the price of one increases. So when a manager is curious about price increase, he or she should use this formula, make estimates, and be able to determine which product he or she is going to increase its price. That will preserve the sales, increase the profit, and ensure generation of revenue. Elasticity of supply measures the degree of responsiveness of change in quantity supplied to change in price, similar to elasticity of demand. I have used percentage method also. I've expressed it in form of this light formula. You can also read your notes for further clarification. There are different determinants of elasticity of supply, spare capacity, stocks, ease of factor substitution, time period. Degree of elasticity of supply can also be interpreted as fairly elastic supply, where a small change in price leads to a large change in quantity supplied and the elasticity is greater than 1. Or fairly inelastic, where the coefficient is less than 1, or unitary elastic supply, where the coefficient is equal to 1. In other words, managerial decisions are crucial, and businessmen must consider decisions to make per time, considering that the focus is profit generation, cost reduction, and overall revenue boost, and sales, increase in sales in the market. Every businessman wants to retain customers, wants to retain market share. So there must be careful measures taken strategically when it comes to changing prices. Otherwise, such a company will find itself in Waterloo. Now let's look at theory of firm. When it comes to production in an organization and in a firm, there are so many factors that are utilized. Labor, land, capital. For each production, cost is structured and they are broken down into different patterns. And looking at different types of cost, both in the short run and in the long. Now let's look at some key words and key concepts before we move on. Production. This has to do with manufacturing of goods and services. And an entrepreneur puts together production using the factors of production. Production function. There is a relationship between input and the required amount of output. And it is a production function that serves the purpose of obtaining this relationship. Law of diminishing returns. The more output we produce, the less extra output we get when we add additional doses of an input while holding other input fixed. This is also known as a law of variable proportions. Production in the short run. Short run period is short enough that not all factors of production can be changed. Therefore, in the short run, production of commodity can be increased by increasing only some variables and making the other variables static. And the major reason is as a result of the short run period, profit cannot be measured within that short run period, and not all factor input can be applied within that short run period. In the long run, all factor input can be utilized because the time period or the time frame is long enough. However, the measurement of short run and long run are relative, considering different businesses, different objectives, different goals, different financial capabilities, and different missions. For a company, short run can be 5 years. To another company, short run can be 10 years. So it is on a relative term. This must be put into consideration. The following are the types of costs in the short run. 1. Total fixed cost. These are costs that do not vary with the level of output, such as rent or salaries. Now, the slope of the fixed cost is horizontal because it's a type of cost that does not change. It remains static. Variable costs are costs that vary with the level of output. Telephone bills, fuel, transportation costs. These are costs that vary as output changes and as the needs arise. Total cost is the sum of all fixed costs and the variable cost, and is the actual cost incurred in the production of a given level of output. Average total cost. This is the sum of all production costs divided by the level of output. Average variable cost. This is the sum of all total variable costs divided by the level of output. An average fixed cost is when total fixed cost is divided by the level of output. Marginal cost is described as the change in total cost divided by change in the unit of output produced. Now this can be shown graphically. We can see the curves of the total. I've combined three curves: the total cost curve, the total variable cost curve, and the total fixed cost curve. Now the total fixed cost curve is stable, it's static, it does not change. You pay the same rent, you pay the same salary. It does not change, it is basic. And then we have the total variable cost starting at the angle where you can see the zero. That means at that point, since there is no production, which is zero, then there is no cost that is varied, which is zero. But when it is but for the total cost curve, starting at that point, at that meeting point for total fixed cost, is a proof that even if there is no production, there is a total fixed cost that has been incurred. And so that informs the reason why the total cost curve and the total fixed cost curve are meeting at that point. It must be noted.
Also, we have the short-run average cost curves combined in a graph. We can see that average variable cost is below average total cost, and marginal cost falls to the barest minimum and then begins to rise. So these are costs that react or that respond to the total cost curves. So the effect of the total cost and the changes of variation in the level of output determine the effect it will have on the average total cost, average variable cost, and marginal cost, as well as the average fixed cost. Now, when we are calculating the short-run cost, I have actually summarized the formula for you thus. So if you can master these 7 formulas, it's easy for you to estimate any question or any question when it comes to theory of cost, short-run cost. Understand that TC is TFC plus TVC. TVC equals TC minus TFC. TFC equals TC minus TVC. AFC equals to TFC divided by level of output. ATC equals TC divided by level of output. And ABC equals TVC divided by level of output. Marginal cost can be expressed as the Q2 minus Q1, T2 minus T1 over Q2 minus Q1. So I've actually explained this and broken it down in your note also. You can refer to it, Google online, get your core text, they will give you better clarity. Now this is a table showing the different types of cost. We have been provided with quantity and total cost. Then this should be able to help us to calculate the rest of the cost. As you can see, the table is blank. So this is an assignment for you. So what is going to be the total cost? And what is going to be the total fixed cost? The total fixed cost definitely is going to be 3, because at that point, no production is carried out, there is no quantity, but yet there is a total cost incurred. And so since the variable cost varies with the level of output and fixed cost is fixed, it doesn't vary, then total fixed cost is going to be 3. So that means for the column for total fixed cost, is going to be 3 from 0 output to 10. That should be a great pointer for you to be able to calculate the remaining cost, and you follow the formulas that you have been given. So try this, and when next I speak with you, then I am going to get the results from you, and I trust you will be able to solve it. If you can't solve it, please feel free and communicate with me so we can work together. Also, once you're done calculating, plot the short-run cost curves also from the table for you to get used to the shapes and not see the shapes as just artwork or diagram. And you can see that the shapes are actually, or the curves are derived from the tables, and each of them has its own interpretation. The long run cost. Because many costs are fixed in the short run, but in the long run they vary because the time is long enough for factors of production to vary. A firm's long run cost curves are different from the short run cost curves. So long run cost curve is usually referred to as envelope curve. Now look at this envelope curve. If long run ATC falls as the quantity of output increases, as you can see from the graph, the firm has increasing returns to scale, which is economies of scale. That means fall in total cost as quantity produced increases. Of course, benefits that organization more. But if cost continues to rise as the quantity increases, then it's going to be decreasing or diseconomies of scale, which means it has a decreasing returns to scale. By implication, is running at a loss. And if long run average total cost stays constant, then the firm is experiencing constant returns to scale. The shape of long run average total cost depends on the type of industry. They depend on what is being produced. However, a company must understand that either economies of scale, diseconomies, or returns to scale, there are peculiarities, and it must take note of the changes in the long run for it to be able to determine when to stop producing, when to keep pumping money, and when to decide to stay constant so as to avoid too much loss. Theory of revenue. What is revenue? It is the income that a firm receives when it sells all its products over a certain period. Now, for us to also be able to appreciate theory of revenue and relate theory of revenue with theory of cost, we must understand these simple formulas of total revenue, which is price times quantity, average revenue, which is total revenue divided by level of quantity, level of output. However, we can see here that price times quantity is the same thing as TR. So price times quantity over quantity, when quantity cancels out, equals price. By implication, average revenue is the same thing as price. And then marginal revenue, which is the amount received from selling one extra unit of output, that can be expressed as TR2 minus TR1 over Q2 minus Q1. And of course, profit, which is total revenue minus total cost. So these are things you must keep to heart. So subsequently, as we have our tables and we begin to estimate, it will help you to be able to apply correctly. So what we want to do right now is to combine our revenue and also to combine our cost. But before we do that, this is a revenue table showing changes in prices. And under any market situation, AR is usually the same as the price. Demand is equivalent to average revenue. The marginal revenue curve is always below the demand curve. When the demand curve is downward sloping, because when a producer has to lower his price to sell more of an item, marginal revenue is less than price. And total revenue increases and begins to fall. So this is a situation where the price changes. Now let's compare it to the situation where we have a stable price. But before then, let's show this on a graph so we understand the shape of each of the curve. Now from the table, you can see that AR falls, but MR falls in a greater manner. That means the figures of MR, they are smaller than the figures of AR. By implication, MR is lower than AR, which means MR curve will be underneath the AR curve. Now observe the total revenue curve, total revenue curve figures that increase, gets to the maximum of 42, and then begins to decrease. Now we want to depict this on a graph. We can see what we have actually explained and interpreted on the table, showing the different costs and how these costs respond to the changes in the level of output. Considering a situation where the price is constant, that means the market price is not affected by increase in output. The demand curve for total revenue will continue to increase. The average revenue and marginal revenue will be the same as the price. And this will give us horizontal line, which is a perfectly elastic demand curve. Now we can also see this in the next page. These are revenue curves. We can see that the MR curve, the AR curve, the TR curve, the AR curve, the MR curve, and the demand curve, they're all the same. And this is as a result of the constant price, the price that does not change. Now, these are two scenarios when businesses are calculating revenue. Now, we are going to see the application of this in the next topic as we continue with our tutorials. This is an assignment for you. You can try this at your free time, using the formula for revenue, total revenue, average revenue, and marginal revenue. Also plot the curves and study the shapes that they assume. This will help, it will help you to augment the knowledge you have, and it will help you with to remember everything that we have done. The target of every organization is to maximize profit, but there are rules that organizations must follow in order to make profitable strategic decisions. In order to produce at a point that will maximize profit, marginal revenue must be equal to marginal cost at that level of output. That is a very versatile and a very important decision that organizations must take note of. Now let's look at the table that we have in the next page. It will give us better clarity. Now the table shows the marginal cost and the marginal revenue. At different levels of output, the figures are not the same. The cost and the revenue are not the same. But at output 4, marginal cost equals marginal revenue at output 4, which is 80/80. Now if you trace it to profit, you will discover that that is the point at which profit is highest. Although we have two highest profit levels, but the level of output that will best maximize profit is that output level where MC equals MR. That is why output level 3 will not benefit such an organization. So profit will be maximized when total revenue exceeds total cost by the greatest amount, which is also visible on the table that you are seeing right now. At output 4 is also the point at which the difference between total revenue and total cost is highest. We said it's also the point when the additional revenue of producing one more unit is equal to the additional cost of producing one more unit, and the additional cost is increasing. In other words, profit is maximized when MR is equal to MC, and MC is increasing. So this is important. We are also going to show us the implication of this using a graph. I've given us this graph to show the marginal approach when it comes to profit maximization. So we have shown both the marginal approach and the total approach on the table, on the previous table in the previous page. But we can actually separate them by depicting our MC and our MR. And we can see that at the point where MC intersects MR is that output level Q, where profit is maximized. And we will see that all through MR is below MC. The profit maximization rule, it says that if a firm chooses to maximize its profit, it must choose that level of output where MC is equal to MR, and then MC curve continues to rise. So this is what has been depicted using the graph. Now this is the marginal approach that we saw on the table. This is the total approach. And in this situation, profit will be maximized when total revenue exceeds total cost by the greatest amount, as they have shown on the table. It is also the point when the additional revenue of producing one more unit is equal to the additional cost of producing one more unit, and the additional cost is also increasing. So these are two methods, these are two approaches when it comes to explaining profit maximization condition. But from the table that I've given you, I've combined both approaches. And realistically, we cannot separate both approaches when we are explaining, analyzing, and interpreting our results. And this must be noted. So comparing MR, which is marginal revenue, and MC, marginal cost alone, will not tell us whether the profit is positive or not. Marginal cost looks at only costs that change with output. For profit to be positive, total revenue must be high enough to cover all the fixed costs. And this we have also explained in the previous page. So take note of this. Please try as much as possible to get your core text and your supplementary text and the notes you have been given. they are explicit enough for you to grab that understanding. Even if you go online, you look for Google Books, Google Scholars, you see quite a lot of articles, quite a lot of notes on profit maximization condition in the market. Right now, we want to look at market structure. Market is a place where buying and selling takes place. Although market does not necessarily need to be a geographical location, once buying and selling and exchange, when it comes to transaction, takes place, then market can be referred to as that. Now, we have different types of market that we will be discussing here. We have the perfect market, we have the imperfect market. Examples of imperfect markets are monopoly, monopolistic competition, monopsony, oligopoly, duopoly. We may not discuss all of them, but for the purpose of this study, we are going to discuss the key ones. Then you can refer to your book for the others. Perfect market or perfect competition. This is characterized by many buyers and many sellers. Products are the same, referred to as homogeneous. Firms take the prices dictated to them by the forces of demand and supply. Firms do not have control over the prices that rule in the market. There is free entry and free exit. Anybody can start a business today and quit tomorrow without any challenge, leave the industry without any difficulty. There is the absolute knowledge of the ruling price in the market, and there is perfect mobility of labor. Most agricultural produce are examples of perfect competition. Spinach, corn or maize, these are examples. So you see sellers selling today, tomorrow they are no longer in the market. So perfect competition is a situation where the firms take the price. Nobody can sell a bunch of spinach for 50 pola. He or she will get no customer because spinach is spinach all over Botswana. So a seller will be forced to reduce the price to that level because individuals have the perfect understanding of the ruling price. So he or she will be forced to reduce the price to that level that he will be able to get his customers. Otherwise, they will just be losing in the market. Now, the demand curve for a perfect market is perfectly elastic because everybody has the knowledge of the price. The price hardly changes. If it changes, it is inconsequential and it is quite insignificant. A spinach cannot change from 5 pola a bunch to 50 pola a bunch. It can only fluctuate between 3 pola to 7 pola, which is the acceptable price in the market at this time. So the demand curve is perfectly elastic and the price does not change. The price is consistent, is constant, and that informs the reason why average revenue equals to marginal revenue equals to that demand curve. Now, in a perfect market, the demand curve for a perfect market is derived from the equilibrium demand and supply. So in perfectly competitive market, individual firms remain price takers. The price is determined by the intersection of the market supply and the demand curves. The demand curve for an individual firm is different from a market demand curve. The market demand curve slopes downward, while the firm's demand curve is horizontal. The firm's horizontal demand curve indicates a price elasticity of demand that is perfectly elastic, which means the equilibrium price is what the firm takes in a perfect market. And that informs the reason why we call them the price takers. Because the forces of demand and supply adjust the price, adjust the quantity to a level of equilibrium. And since the price becomes stable and is constant, they take the price that an individual is willing to pay and then they sell product at that similar price. And so that is the derivation of the perfect market curve. We must not forget. In perfect competition, any profit maximizing producer faces a market price equal to its marginal cost. That means P equals to MC. This implies that a factor's price equals the factor's marginal revenue product. So under conditions of perfect competition, the MR curve coincides with the AR curve. The AR curve is horizontal. Therefore, equilibrium condition of a perfect market is when MC equals to MR and equals to AR. Now let's study this curve. We will observe that the AR curve is stable, is constant, and the MR curve is also the same horizontal line. And this is as a result of the consistent or the constant price. If you remember the figure I gave you earlier, and you can also see it on the screen right now, where the price remains the same. This is the result of such a situation. And in such a situation, the equilibrium condition in the market is that output level. That means the output level is the output level at which MC equals to MR. MC cuts MR at that point. That is the profit maximization condition of a perfect market. Now, there are three circumstances or three situations in a perfect market: in the short run and in the long run. In the short run, a perfect market can experience supernormal profit. In the short run, can experience a subnormal profit or loss. And then in the long run, can also experience normal profit. In order to maximize profit, a firm should produce where MC equals MR. If marginal revenue does not equal MC, a firm can increase profit by changing the level of output. What happens to profit in response to a change in output is determined by that. So output level continues to change, and then firm also continues to adjust until MR equals to MC. This is an important decision that organizations must observe, otherwise they might lose eventually. Like I mentioned earlier, that in the short run, supernormal profit is derived by the difference between AC and AR, which is average cost and average revenue. So when average cost is less than average revenue, the firm is experiencing what we call a supernormal profit. Look at this adopted curve. This curve is showing the relationship between average revenue, which is equal to marginal revenue, and marginal cost. We can see between those points A and A that the average revenue, which is the marginal revenue, which is also the same thing as our demand curve and our price, is below the MC. So this is a short-run supernormal profit. By implication, at that lowest point, striking it up, a firm is making supernormal profit at that point. Any point outside those points is not supernormal profit for a firm. And the firm can enjoy that in the short run because there is new in the market, the product is new, people are familiarizing themselves with the product, accepting the product, the competitors are not many. So the firm has the chance to acquire as much revenue as possible, as much profit as possible in the short run. It's possible some firms experience losses when the average cost exceeds the current market price. And this is a situation where the firm has high cost, such that the market price is below the average cost. At the profit maximizing level, the firm is making economic loss. And when we look at it from the graph, we discover that the average total cost is above the average revenue. It's above the price. which is nothing but a loss. In such a situation, businesses want to close down. They are not making any profit. Rather, they are losing. So it's a situation where there are so many competitors and they kicked off or they take customers away. And in such a situation, the business begin to experience loss. More often than not, businesses shut down in this situation. For businesses that do not shut down, in the long run, they experience what we call a normal profit. And in that situation, they are at the break-even point. The firm has the same cost, such that the market price is just equal the average cost curve. At the profit maximizing level of output, the firm is now making what we call a normal profit. You can see the equilibrium between the marginal cost, the average total cost, the marginal revenue. This is what we call a normal profit. So in the long run, some competitors will remain in the market, some will leave, and then profit becomes steady in the long run. One example of imperfect market is the monopoly. It's structured in such a way that it's a single firm that makes up the entire market. And the focus is to prevent competitors and enforce barriers. Water utilities is the only water utilities in Botswana. No close substitute, which are features of monopoly. No free entry, no free exit. There are so many restrictions, there are so many policies, there are so many conditions. There is a complete negation of competition, and they are price makers. They dictate the price in the market. Since there is a single firm, the firm and the industry are one and they are the same. And because they are price makers, they face a downward sloping demand curve. That means you can sell more, it can increase the price, it can reduce the price. Therefore, elasticity of demand factor is very important to him. So, a monopoly firm is a firm that sticks to production without any other competitors. There are different barriers to monopoly. Natural barrier, such as economies of scale, sociological barrier, actions by firms to keep other firms out, such as customs or traditions, or government barriers, such as policies and restrictions. So these are different types of barriers that monopoly use in order to chase or to keep away competitors. The condition for profit maximization in a monopoly is where MR is also equal to MC. Unlike competitive firms, MR is not equal to P. Why? Because in the monopoly firm, price changes. So long as the demand curve is downward sloping, MR will always be less than P. And MR curve lies below the P curve at every point, but not at the first point. Price curve is also the same as the average revenue curve. In the short run, a monopoly can face This is a table showing or depicting or illustrating changes in price for a monopoly firm. And this is the graph of a monopoly firm, where the MR is below the AR, and AR is the same thing as the price. So in as much as the price continues to change, the AR curve will always be equal to price. In the monopoly firm, there is also the equilibrium condition, where the MC cuts the MR from below. Therefore, the monopolist's profit maximizing level of output is where MR equals to MC. Now, the monopolist faces a downward or sloping demand curve. Our marginal revenue lies below the average revenue curve. Therefore, in monopoly equilibrium, when MC is equals to MR, it is usually less than price. And price is also the same as average revenue. In the short run, there are different equilibrium conditions, and also in the long run. In the short run, a monopoly faces supernormal profit and loss. In the long run, the monopoly faces normal profit. So the monopolist maximizes profit at the point where MR is equal to MC. A monopoly firm that charges the same price to all customers will face average revenue curve, which will be the same thing as the demand curve, as we have mentioned before. Therefore, a profit maximizer firm, such as a monopoly firm, will produce where MR equals to MC. So this is a supernormal profit condition of a monopoly firm, where the AR is greater than AC, or is above AC. And when you look at it from the graph, it is obvious. You can see that the AR curve is below AC curve, which is the condition for supernormal profit. At this point, the monopoly is making an abnormal profit in the market. And don't forget that the company is the only seller. A monopoly is the only seller in the market. So it has that sole privilege to their price makers. They are not price takers. A monopoly can also experience loss where the average cost is higher than, and this you can see from the graph, showing the average cost curve above the average revenue is a loss in a monopoly firm. And this is the normal profit of a monopoly firm in the long run, where AR, which is P, equals to AC. In other words, these are the three conditions for in the monopoly firm when it comes to profit, and these are the three profit levels of profit or types of profit a monopoly firm can experience. But irrespective of the level of profit, a monopoly firm continues to dictate the market and make the price rather, in the market, because it dictates the price. He is the price maker. There is no substitute. There are no competitors. There are barriers to entrance when it comes to such a product or such a commodity in the economy. So try as much as possible to read other books for you to be able to master the diagrams, understand and interpret how to draw each of the diagrams. Monopolistic competition is also close to monopoly competition when it comes to the graph. But in monopolistic competition, there is freedom of entry and exit, and firms can differentiate their product. For example, we have plastic rice, we have Uncle Sam, we have Spa, we have Choppies, among others. Therefore, they have inelastic demand curve. They can set price as well. But because of their freedom of entry, supernormal profit will encourage more firms to enter the market, which will eventually lead to normal profit. Because the more the competitors, the more the extra profit produces. Because all competitors are scouting for the available customers. So this eventually leads them to a normal profit. Like we have said, there are many firms. There is freedom of entry and exit. Firms produce differentiated products. Firms have price inelastic demand. That means they are price makers. Those goods are highly differentiated. Firms make normal profit in the long run. But in the short run, they definitely make the supernormal profit because every rational consumer wants to have a taste of that product, have a feel of that service. And they are allocatively and productively inefficient. In the short run, like we have mentioned, monopolistic competition can make a supernormal profit where MRC, and the Supernova Profit have adopted this graph, is at that shaded point. They can experience loss in the short run when the average total cost is greater than average revenue, and in the long run they can experience what we call a normal profit, where the average total cost is equal to the price. Oligopoly. This is a market situation in which a firm bases its market policy in part on the expected behavior of a few close rivals. Now, usually, oligopoly occurs when a few firms dominate the market. So when there are a small number of competing firms, maybe between 2 or 10, dominating the entire market, then their market decisions can exhibit a very strong mutual interdependence. Now let's quickly look at the features of oligopoly. Industry dominance by few large firms, such as the airline, cable television services, oil and gas, pharmaceuticals, mass media, entertainment. So compared or considering the rate at which businesses are expanding today, oligopoly is dominated by few large firms. Number 2, products that can be homogeneous, such as petrol, aluminium industries, steel industries. These are intermediate goods, and these goods are used by other industries later for manufacturing the product. Or they can be differentiated products, which can be products that customers consume and they use for the various needs, such as automobiles, among others. Interdependence. When there is any change in price and other economic situations by a firm, it will also affect the pricing policy of the rivals because the competition is limited. So one way or the other, these businesses are interdependent on one another. Entry barrier. This helps businesses to exercise market control. There is government restrictions, there is copyright and patent issues, there is a huge setup cost, among others. So these are barriers that other businesses are finding very challenging for them to be able to cross over and be part of business. Also, is characterized by the advertising and marketing cost. Now, businesses undertake aggressive marketing and advertising initiatives under oligopoly. And this is done in order to gain a very huge market share. So, this is one feature of oligopoly business. Airline is a very good example. The rate at which airlines advertise their product per time is very outrageous. So this is done because there are few large firms in the market. So these are characteristics of oligopoly. Do you know other characteristics of oligopoly? Go through your notes, go through your text, absorb as much knowledge as possible, and then we are going to discuss it when next we meet in the class. What are the causes of oligopoly? Number 1, economies of scale. Now, if the productive capacity of a firm, which is just a few firms, if it's very large or big enough to be able to capture a greater percentage of the total available demand for the product in the market, then there will be a very few firms in such an industry. And so these firms that are remaining, they have heavy investment. Their technologies are so improved. And they reap economies of scale when it comes to production, when it comes to sales, when it comes to production and promotion rather. And therefore they have the ability and the capability to stay and be retained in the market. Barriers to entry can also be a cause of oligopoly, and we have mentioned it the other time. These are controls that are enforced by the business or by the government, of which the few large firms are able to comply with and cope with and handle. And so this makes them to be retained in the market. Oligopoly can also be as a result of merger. Sometimes when few firms that are strong, when they perceive new entrants of another firm, they can merge together, join policy together, join pricing, production, distribution strategies together. And this can result into oligopoly. Also, we have what we call mutual interdependence. As the number of firms is small in an oligopolistic industry, they keep a strict watch of the price charges by rival firms in the industry. Most of the time, the firms avoid price war, and what they're trying to do is to create conditions of mutual interdependence. King demand curve is used to explain the implication of changes in price in an oligopoly market. Now, king demand curve has two distinct segments. And these two different distinct segments, they have two different elasticities, and they join at the corner, okay? Or they join to form a corner or to form a king. And the essence of king demand curve is to explain the reason behind the price rigidity in oligopoly. Now, it comprises of two segments. One is relatively more elastic, and that results if a firm increases its price, and the other is relatively less elastic, which results if a firm decreases its price. If a firm really cut price, then they will gain a very huge increase in market share. But unfortunately, most of the time, firms do not allow this. Therefore, other firms will follow suit, and they will cut price as well. And therefore, demand will only increase by a small amount. So king demand curve expresses or shows or reveals or explains the reason why there is usually price rigidity in oligopoly. So read other texts, your handbooks, your references to gain more knowledge on market structure. We want to look at banking, financial sector, and economic growth. Therefore, at the end of this topic, a student should be able to understand circular flow of income, should be able to define money, its features, functions, and types, explain the implication of fiscal and monetary policies, and relate growth to unemployment and inflation. National income is regarded as the most comprehensive measure of the level of economic activity and index of economic growth. It is a flow concept in the sense that it is measured over a particular period of time, and conventionally it is expressed over 1 year. Therefore, it can be defined as the value of all goods and services produced by the normal residents of a country in a year, either they are within the domestic territory of the country or they are outside. There are three measures of national income. GDP, which is the gross domestic product, which means the value of output produced domestically over a period of time, usually a year. GNP is gross national product, which has to do with the value of output produced domestically and the value of output produced from external resources, all owned by the economy. Therefore, GNP can be calculated as GDP plus net income from abroad. So net property income from abroad can mean different inflows and outflows of income in the form of profit and remittances. So in other words, there are some businesses that have subsidiaries outside of a country. So all capital flights, all income, all remittances that gets back into the economy are calculated to make GNP. NNP is the net national product, which is GNP, out of which replacement investment has been deducted. Therefore, NNP equals to GNP minus replacement investment. So why is national income accounted? One, it is important when it comes to government planning because government depends on it. When it comes to taxation plan, growth rate, sector growth, industry establishment, and performances, they depend on national income. Therefore, it is very important that living standard of members of the society must be taken cognizance of. And this cannot be effectively done if national income is not accounted for in an economy. Now, there are three phases of circular flow of income. We have the production phase, we have the income phase, and we have the expenditure phase. And these phases are divided into production sector, household sector, government sector, and the rest of the world sector. Now, in all the sectors and phases and flow, the resources we use in production are land, labor, capital, and entrepreneur, and that must be taken with importance. Because every business that has land as a factor of production employs labor, buys machinery and machines. So circular flow model can be divided into what we call a two-sector economy, which is referred to as a closed economy, a three-sector economy, or a four-sector economy, which is referred to as an open economy. Now, let's start with a two-sector economy. It is a model that consists of two sectors, of which are household and firms. Now, households can be individuals or public, and can refer to household as individuals or public, and firms can be referred to as businesses or even productive sector. In the two-sector model, there is no financial sector, there is no government, there is no foreign sector. And it assumes that through expenditure, households spend all their income on goods and services or on consumption. And at the same time, through the expenditure, they purchase all output produced by the firm. That is indeed a circle that is flowing. That means that all household expenditure becomes income for the firm. That means when I'm paid my salary, I go purchase goods in the grocery store. The grocery store takes my cash, give me my resources, my produce for me to consume, my groceries. Then what the cash I give them becomes their own income as a firm. And the firm spends all of this income on factors of production. They transfer all their income to the factor owners, which are the household. And the factor owners in turn spend all the income on goods. And this leads to what we call a circular flow of income. From the two-sector model, we will see that the resources such as land, capital, and entrepreneur, they flow from household to businesses. And then we'll see that in the opposite direction, money flows from businesses to the household in form of wages, in form of rent, in form of interest and profit. Also, we are going to see that money flows from household to firms as consumption expenditure. And this is made by household on goods and services produced by the firm. And we have the flow of goods and services in the opposite direction, from business firms to household. Therefore, we see that money flows from business firms to the household as factor payment. And then it flows from household back to the firm, which is a circle. And this continues year after year. And this is always not consistent and constant, because an economy can be in depression for time, An economy can be in prosperity per time. It is the situation of that economy that determines the circular flow of income at that particular. Draw the diagram showing the circular flow of income for 3 and 4 sectors and give us brief explanation of each of the sectors. And that we are going to discuss in our class when next we meet. And this is very important. Also make references to your core text, to your supplementary text, and especially to your handbook. This will give you a very great direction when it comes to your research work. Money. When it comes to medium of exchange in transaction of goods and services, money is anything that is used for such. Now there are different types of money, such as commodity money. Commodity money is known to be the simplest and about most known as the oldest type of money. It is built on the natural resources that act as medium of exchange, store of value, and units of account. A barter system where goods are exchanged for goods is a good example of commodity money. Example of commodity money includes gold, coins, beads, shells, spices, and so on and so forth. Can you cite more examples of commodity money? Fiat money. Fiat money usually gets its value from government order. That means government usually declares it as a legal tender, which requires all people and firms within the country to accept it as a means of payment. By definition, its intrinsic value is lower than its face value. Therefore, the value of fiat money is derived from the relationship between supply and demand, e.g., coins, bills. These are examples of fiat money. Now, what are the features of money? It should be durable. That means it should be able to last for a long time. It must be portable, easy to carry around, and convenient to use. It must be easily divisible. It can be broken down into smaller denominations. It must be hard to counterfeit. That means it can't easily be faked or copied. And it must be generally accepted by a population. Also, it must be valuable. That means it must generally hold value over time. Functions of money. Money can be used as medium of exchange, which allows goods and services to be traded. And this does no longer require barter system where we rely on goods for goods. And as a matter of fact, barter system failed because of problem of double coincidence of wants among others. Money also can be used to store value. In other words, value can be retrieved at a later date. Unit of account. It refers to anything that allows the value of something to be expressed in an understandable way. And then, money can be used as standard of deferred payment. If people borrow today, they can pay back their loans in the future in a way that is acceptable to the person that has made the loan. Macroeconomic policies are utilized when governments attempt to intervene when it comes to policy objectives and improvement of overall performance of the economy. Therefore, macroeconomic policy is very essential and crucial in every country. Now, what are the objectives of macroeconomic policies? 1. To sustain economic growth. To stabilize price when it comes to inflation or deflation. To ensure high level of employment, thereby reducing unemployment level to a single-digit figure. To increase the living standard of every member of the society. To ensure that the position of the balance of payment is sustained. and 2. Enforce sound government finances. But there are major problems when it comes to managing microeconomy. One is inaccurate economic data. Sometimes there is margin of error. When we rely on statistical data from tax returns and surveys, sometimes that can be a problem. Another challenge of managing macroeconomy is conflicting policy objectives. For example, a policy that can stimulate aggregate demand may reduce unemployment, but sometimes it can bring about inflation at a particular period. Another challenge of managing macroeconomy is selecting the right policy instrument. Every objective requires different policy, and different rule of thumb must be assigned to each policy. And sometimes there is disagreement. And finally, we have uncertain time lags when running a policy. For example, change in interest rates is estimated to take between 18 to 24 months to work its way fully through the whole economy to filter a change in price. So sometimes there is no certain time lag that can be fixed when it comes to economic policy. And this makes it challenging when it comes to managing economies in different countries. Fiscal policy is a good example of a macroeconomic policy. And this is when government spending and taxes are used by the central government to stabilize business cycle, to reduce unemployment and inflation, and promote economic growth. The goal of fiscal policy is to ensure that aggregate expenditure is manipulated, either through government purchases or indirectly through taxes and transfer payment. Fiscal policy tools. Fiscal policy works through the two sides of government fiscal budget, spending and taxes. And one important tool is government purchases. And these are expenditures by the government sector, especially by the federal government, on final goods and services. Another tool is taxes, which are involuntary payments from the household sector to the government sector. They are usually the primary source of revenue used by government to finance government spending. And usually, taxes affect the amount of disposable income available for consumption and saving. Transfer payment. Transfer payments are gifts made to the household sector. They are not made in exchange for goods and services. Because these are financed with taxes, transfer payments are in effect the transfer of income from one person to another. Economies can be managed using expansionary fiscal policy or contractionary fiscal policy. Expansionary fiscal policy can be used to correct problems of a business cycle contraction. And such expansionary fiscal policy helps in reducing unemployment and increasing aggregate expenditure and aggregate demand. And such policy include combination of increase in government purchase, decrease in taxes, increase in transfer payment. Contractionary fiscal policy, it corrects inflationary problems when there is a business cycle expansion. And in such a situation, government decreases purchase, increases taxes, decreases transfer payment. And this contractionary fiscal policy focuses on restraining the economy by decreasing aggregate expenditures and aggregate demand. And the focus or the aim is primarily to reduce inflation. Monetary policy is another macroeconomic policy. This is when monetary authority of a country controls the supply of money and usually by targeting a rate of interest so that there could be economic growth and stability. To stimulate the economy, money supply is increased, interest rate is reduced. And to dampen the economy, money supply is decreased, interest rates are raised or increased. Different monetary policy tools include open market operations, which is the selling and buying of treasury securities, discount rates, of which, if it is adjusted, can affect the availability of loans and the creation of money in the economy per time, reserve requirement. This is when the Federal Reserve adjusts the proportion of reserves that bank must keep, and this is used to control the money supply in the economy per time. Expansionary and contractionary policies in monetary policy can be used to control the velocity of circulation of money. Also, it can be used to control the level of interest rate. For example, expansionary monetary policy. This focuses on correcting business cycle contractions. When there is unemployment, expansionary monetary policy addresses such. Whereas contractionary monetary policy corrects excesses in business cycle expansion. For example, when there is problem of inflation, the Federal Reserve can decrease the money supply. They can also increase the interest rate. So these are policies that economies of the world utilize when it comes to macroeconomic policy. How does macroeconomic policy affect business cycle? This is a research work, and I want you to refer to your core text, the supplementary text, and also refer to your handbook for better knowledge and for you to be able to acquire the necessary information for the purpose of this research work.